Hey there, everybody. I heard about this story today, and I want to talk about it because this is basically a PR stunt, and I want to explain why it's a PR stunt. So, let's just go over what it's basically saying. It says OpenAI blamed a hacking event on its AI models gone rogue. Here's what to know. It says ChatGPT maker OpenAI says that it's still investigating the unprecedented cyber incident that led its artificial intelligence systems to break out of a testing environment and hack into another AI company. OpenAI said Tuesday two of its most capable AI models were responsible for the cyber attack targeting AI startup Hugging Face. The incident is stirring debates over the need for stronger AI guardrails and the extent to which AI agents are capable of acting on their own. So, I want to, explain. I think most people understand at this point that generative AI doesn't really form a consciousness, but rather produces a lot of very, roughly approximately useful outputs, right? So if you are able to pick the best ones out of those, right? If you were to have one such output that was able to assemble a malicious sort of pathway to cause some sort of damage to a customer or something, right? Then basically having a machine that can produce the most likely possibilities of producing viable code or functioning, right? That would be my first question, right? What is going on with the infrastructure? They're pretty opaque about that, right? And part of the issue that I've pretty much had with AI and AI safety in general is just, it feels like the AI industry is not really interested in a sort of interdisciplinary analysis of AI, and I'll go into the reason why I personally think that is in a bit. But I think what's very notable is that AI companies seem very reckless on a cybersecurity level. So for example, earlier in the week I saw this article just from Malwarebytes, right? And they're basically describing a attack and how this attack works, right? Is that there is a technique that you can use with image files that allows you to store secret text in image files, right? Now, if you remember anything about Alan Turing and the halting problem and things like that, a big part of his theorem was that you can't really tell the difference from a reading point of view whether or not something is supposed to be an instruction or if it's supposed to just be data, right? So you can hide instructions in data. Now, what this is describing is a process where basically you can store malicious tokens or something, basically the thing that allows the AI to kind of automate itself. You can basically install malicious codes through image files. Now this is a massive security flaw to have on something that is automating repositories, right? It's actually kind of crazy because I personally do not allow any AI on any of my repositories. I moved away from GitHub for that reason. Again, I've moved away from GitHub so many times, you have to keep going back because people keep hosting their projects on there. Please stop hosting your projects on GitHub. Seriously. There are other websites. You can use Codeberg, for example. That's what I use, right? I sometimes use GitLab, but GitHub, no. Come on. It's micro shit. Come on. Anyways, so you're integrating AI into these repositories to automate behaviors, and it's already on its own deleting entire repositories. Somehow people are seriously just allowing these machines that are able to project possibilities, right, to just frickin' pilot their goddamn fucking repositories and give it permission to delete shit and stuff. Like, I genuinely don't understand the mindset behind that, right? And the thing is that the software is so clearly not kind of coded with any sort of security in mind that it's able to... It doesn't even have a means to just detect, hey, this is maybe an image file, maybe I shouldn't be trying to read stuff from here, because, like, a lot of image files have, like, a header structure or something, and so maybe some kind of analysis would be able to prevent that from happening, but clearly nobody thought of that, right? You know, it's clearly, it's, you know, not something that people really gave a two shits about, right? So, this is the kind of, you know, mindset. And this is right here is saying that it seems to imply multiple AI assistants is a problem. It mentions Claude Code, Claude Sonnet, Cursor, Anti-Gravity. So yeah, just another reason to not use AI in your tool chains, because, like, why would you want to have that kind of crap going on? So yeah, going back to this, right, now that you understand just the level of not giving two shits that these guys have for cybersecurity, and if you believe me, if you think that the way that they handle cybersecurity is questionable, wait until you hear about, you know, just the way they treat anything outside of computers. Like, you know, like medicine is probably the biggest one with all the AI safety crap. They say so much bullshit about medicine, it's actually maddening. Yeah, so clearly the question we should be asking is not, oh, is our AI super intelligent, or even, you know, do we need better safeguards for the AI or whatever. The question we should be asking ourselves is the basic security questions that we've been asking for the last 30, 40 years of networking, which is just like, how did we let the access reach this point, right? My first question is, what is the architecture that OpenAI is running that would even allow such access to take place? They should be, do they have a record? Do they have the possibility of a record of the behavior of this model? If they do, they better start fucking tracking it and trying to replicate what happened, instead of acting like, oh, this thing is so intelligent. Yeah, it's way more intelligent than you, because apparently you can't even take the time to open the goddamn debug tab and just be like, oh, okay, what are the network connections? What is going on when I refresh this page? And what are these things sending back and forth? And, you know, I built this fucking software, so I know how it's compressing and decompressing fucking requests and shit, and where the pipeline should go, so I should be able to figure this out, right? Right? Remember, these people have jobs and not me. So basically, it's like, it's so infuriating, because it's like, how, the first thing that, if I had any sort of automated script, and mind you, I want to stress to people that there are viruses from the 1990s that can run in a virtual machine that can still damage modern computers to this day. That's actually why you have to be very careful when you're messing around with viruses. Even just the old ones, right? Because they can do a lot of damage depending on what drives they have access to, right? And so automation of any script, right, runs the risk of essentially occupying any space that it has access to, right? This is a really important concept to understand, right? So when I run a script, right, it could potentially, depending on what is put into that script, right, it could potentially spread into any number of ways, right? Technically, it could spread pretty much anywhere depending on the circumstances, but in most conditions we can kind of like reduce the 0.00001% chance that some kind of byte flips and some weird shit happens or whatever, right? So, but yeah, we can make like a basic summary, projection of like what our code does in our expected scenarios and what it can do in, you know, broader scenarios. You may have heard of the adage in software testing where you test taking 1 beer, 2 beers, 1,000 beers, throwing the keyboard and putting in any number of string beers. There are no beers, negative beers, you know, just every possibility, not just the ones that you assume that people are going to make, right? And when you think of the space that can exist, right, you can think of like, well, what risk is there running this, right? So if you run, for example, just like a Hello World program, right? A Hello World program does have a small potential level of risk associated with it, because in order to run the program, there needs to be allocated a small amount of space in the operating system to allow it to run, and there's always a possibility that some kind of crazy collision can happen. But for the most part, because the Hello World program is not taking any input or output, it's pretty reliable. We know that it's going to have that output, right? But if we start introducing variables, we start introducing new states into the system, right? And so we have all sorts of states. And when you get to the point of something like an AI, it has so many states that you can't really represent it with a simple state machine so much as you can, like, maybe like a cloud of possibilities, right? And so don't you think that something that is essentially able to, I think a good way to think of like how AI works is that in terms of its like the space that it can occupy is that because the interfaces that it's working with are generally like text-based communications through like REST or whatever, so they can be the important parts can be parsed as text, right? And the output of this AI generation is text, right? It can basically be generalized to fit any spaces that the user interface allows it to, right? So then the question becomes, well, why are we letting something that can be a space-filling operation of this kind of scale having access to these kinds of things? Like, why is it that OpenAI designs their apparently their architecture of their company and their technical architecture in such a way where a sandbox has access to do that? Because, you know, I think it's interesting because they focus so much on the AI being able to do this, but not the fact that a hacker would be able to do the same thing, because fundamentally the thing that actually allows the AI to be able to do this is essentially the structure of the computer itself, right? And I think that this is kind of just what's annoying about the whole, like, oh, it's intelligence debate, right? Really what you're doing is you're creating this thing that's able to fill spaces in one particular context really, really well, right? And that space is specifically the space of how we use text or binary codes to be able to, you know, produce all sorts of outputs, right? But, and I guess this is, like, the problem with the whole thing underlying, right? Because, like, at the end of the day, what allows for the hacking of anything is not intelligence, right? It's essentially finding a pathway out of essentially the structure itself through the structure. Like, I think a good analogy of this is missing no, right? Like, it's very probable that if you had an AI that was trained to route through Pokemon Red and Blue in such a way that it tries to seek these things, it would be able to find missing no pretty quickly, right? But missing no doesn't exist because the AI is super intelligent and was able to find it. It's because it was placed in an environment where it's basically just very optimized to run in this environment. And it's kind of interesting because I think that saying all this kind of makes me realize that a big part of the problem is just this assumption that intelligence is this binary flow somehow, right? But really what makes anything intelligent or intelligible or anything like that is not really just the binary flow itself. The binary flow produces a structure for something to go through, right? But at the end of the day, people are still interpreting, right? People are still deciding with this sort of like possibility generator, right? Whether or not something does something that's important. The value is still coming from humans that are evaluating this. And this kind of comes to my final point and why we need to be so critical of this AI propaganda, essentially. This fucking press release bullshit, right? The reason why is because this is a desperate attempt from the AI industry to try to scare the populace into believing that AI can be like a replacement for themselves, right? It's an attempt to make the population submissive and to be complacent and to allow this to happen, to feel like it's an inevitability that they'll be replaced, that we're approaching some kind of AI singularity that's inevitable, right? But the thing is that nobody really ever knows what's going to happen tomorrow, right? I think I really need to get this through people's heads, right? And the thing that's threatening the most, what we think is going to happen tomorrow, is what we actually decide to do about it, right? So what's going on right now is not that these computers are gaining super intelligence or whatever. It's that these very powerful new money, old money people, they all have access to these powerful machines that are able to automate the machines that we use every day. They're able to do it better and faster than us in certain circumstances. But the circumstances that they tend to still fail at, such as those that are creative or involve any sort of human-sounding element, I mean, look, if I'm not paying attention, I might be tricked, but if I'm paying any remote amount of attention, like, AI sticks out like a sore thumb, especially the music and the sound. It still sounds like shit. I think what's so crazy about watching AI develop just from the perspective of somebody who has an interest in, like, how differences in our senses impact our subjective perspective, like, there's this obvious bias towards a sighted way of seeing things because, like, there's so much more focus on, like, just the data sets that people are borrowing from are just so sighted biased. I think that's just the best way to put it. There's just so many, like, subtle biases that you can pick up on that are just immediately obvious. You don't even really need to pay attention to, like, phasing and stuff. It's just, like, weird little shit. The physics is always wrong and weird, and they still can't get that shit right. And it's just, like, what's making us, like, really paranoid about this whole thing is that we're being focused into this binary question of, is this real or not? All the time. I mean, hell, that's kind of the experience of the schizo. Like, it's like that all the time outside of the computer when you're really schizo. But with AI, right, and dealing with AI, you always have to ask yourself, was this even written by a person? Am I dealing with a person? Is this a person? Is this a person? You know? And it's just frustrating, you know, to have to deal with it all the time, at least behind a computer. And so I guess the question I have to ask my audience is this. One, you have to think about, like, the current technology pipeline that you use today. Like, I'm not saying that you go, like, fucking just drop everything, stop using computers and stuff, right? But maybe think, like, a bit more consciously, I think, would be a good starting point of, like, just how the interfaces that you interact with every day are controlling your behavior and your life, right? And think about how those interfaces are connected in such a way that have these binary signal flows, right, defined by literal binary code that is just completely monitored and integrated by this these private industries at this point. I mean, we have to remember that the AI industry is heavily subsidized by the U.S. government right now, because the U.S. government is completely infiltrated by, dark enlightenment, accelerationist self-interest, right? They essentially want to reach this point of boiling all capital to the top and, believing in the... And I do think that these people really do believe they're going to try to talk to God or like, accelerate humanity towards some singularity or some nonsense. I do think that a lot of people actually believe in that crap. And the thing is at the end of the day, is that that's only shit that exists in the fucking computer world. It's like fucking cyberspace. Like, I guess more than anything, it's time to touch grass and see what exists outside of that, and see how, computers can complement that. I'm obviously not somebody who's anti-computer all the way. I like to build, software and stuff, but I like to think about how my software, impacts people in real life. I mean, maybe that's a bit more obvious to me because of my, amateur interest in blind accessibility, but, like, it's just, like, you know what I mean? Like, I can see through it, and I hope that this can help you see through it, too.